Welcome to the weekly interview podcast for the Inside Running podcast. Thank you for tuning in for another weekend. If you got a long run planned, boy, I've got a treat for you today. This is a re-released interview that we did back in May 2019. I say we, I pushed the button and released it. Croaks did absolutely nothing. Moose needs to take all the credit with this one. It was a two-part episode back in May with Rod Dixon, the New Zealand champion runner. He got a bronze at the Olympics back in 1972 at Munich, and also probably famously known for his win in the 1983 New York City Marathon. He's got some great stories. There's some absolute classics in here, which is probably no surprise why we are re-releasing this episode. Think about, I know I re-listened to it the other week and, probably didn't give Moose as much credit as he deserved back in when he recorded this episode, but there's a few really good through lines here, like the Sir Edmund Hillary stuff, which is spoken about. That's really cool to hear how that comes up throughout the episode. The way that Dixon just brings up stories about his brother and, it makes it sound like just a special relationship between his brother and himself. And they're just the humour that he can go from talking about the terrorist attacks at the Olympics to then talking about, winning his weight in beer a couple of minutes later. So I know you're going to enjoy this one. It is, something that I think when you listen back to some of these old interviews and some of our listeners may not have been on that journey with us back in 2019 and listening to some of our content, but it really makes me proud to hear this kind of long form chat with an absolute legend of our sport. And once again, massive hats off to Moose for the research he did in putting this conversation together, because it has aged like a fine wine. A massive thank you to people that listened and wrote in about the Jess Stenton interview last week. Never really seen that many DMs come in about an interview before, so a massive thanks to Jess for her openness and the detail she went into talking about her debut marathon experience, and all those people that wrote in. It was it's really, we kind of see the download numbers and just know how many people listen, but sometimes you don't really get much feedback coming back the other way. So I really appreciate all those people that contacted myself or Jess or the Inside Running podcast page directly. We read all those messages and definitely appreciate that. I think it went to something crazy like it was the 22nd most listened to sport podcast in Australia going by iTunes, which is nuts because you go through the list of all the, probably top 50, top 70, and it's like ESPN, SEN, Fox Footy, rugby, golf, AFL football, soccer, that kind of stuff. So to see a little independently owned running podcast in that close to the top 20 is massive thanks to the listeners out there for listening to the show, because that's where it kind of pops up. Anyway, enjoy this chat with Dixon. I know you're going to love it. Let us know what you think, and thanks for tuning in to the Inside Runner podcast.
Rod Dixon, welcome to the Inside Running podcast.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here, and I'm good to be here in New Zealand. I've only got a few more days before I head back to California, but it's just that fall weather, and it's just fabulous and beautiful, and there's nice fall days. The colours are amazing. So, it's going to be a wonderful impression to leave or to have as I travel the world.
And sounds like good running weather. Did you get some runs in there?
I got some runs on. I just love running on the beach. I don't do a lot of road running anymore. I love the trails, but if I can go bare feet, which would be mainly along the beach, on the golf course, around the recreation grounds, so I love doing that. But no, I haven't been doing much running lately. Mainly mountain biking. I go out about 4 times a week.
Yeah.
Average is 2.5, 3 hours sometimes. Yeah, beautiful.
Before we get into it, most of our listeners will be aware of you, Rod. I know in Ballarat, where I live, I own a running store there, and there is a massive poster of you on the wall, standing with your arms in the air, and poor Jeff Smith behind you on the ground.
That's That'll be good. Yeah, they'll. Yeah, that was that magic moment.
Yeah,
moment. I'm sure we'll have a chat about that. But
we will.
And Graham Crouch was from Ballarat, wasn't he?
Graham Crouch. Look, I'm not sure. I know Steve Monaghetti, Tony Benson, or Shane Nankervis. We had a lot of good runners come through. Graham Crouch, this one might have been before me.
Yeah.
But no, the main question we get is that Robert Di Castella? And then I go when they look up at you and point, and then I get to tell the story of your marathon, which hopefully I'll know more and in more detail after today.
Cool.
But you're our first Olympic medalist on the show. We're 80 episodes in, so this is very exciting.
Whoa.
Yeah, and like we've had some runners with some range, but nothing like what you bring to the table. So I'm going to read some PBs out, and if you hear anything wrong, or you just call me out on it.
Okay.
800 meters, 1 minute 47. Oh, is that 46? I thought that might have been 46.
Actually, you didn't get the 400, 49.5.
Oh, well, yeah, can't miss that one.
I love when I was always banging on 50s and 51s and then finally I cracked the 52nd, and that's a factor. That's a factor. Then so you got that 400 under 50. Yeah. Then the key was to get your 800 under 2 minutes, and then really the next one was the mile under 4 minutes, and as you tick those off, and you get inspired by setting a goal and then achieving them. So it was all realistic goals, and I was able to achieve them.
Well, it certainly was, because you went well under all of them. The 800 we've mentioned, 1,500 metres, 3 minutes 33.89. The mile, 3 minutes 53.62. 2 mile, 8 minutes 14. The 3,000 steeplechase, 8 minutes 29 seconds. 5,000 metres, 13.17. 10,000, 28.11, and a hilly marathon in 2 hours, 8 minutes and 59 seconds.
Okay, and the half marathon was 1 hour, 2 minutes and 12.
Well done. Yeah, sorry, I missed that.
Yeah.
That's quite the range, and I'd love to chat later on about how you got to that range. But firstly, let's talk about how you got into running. Now, apparently you were pretty handy at the sack race back in the day.
Yeah, the Sunday school picnic.
Yeah. And the egg and spoon. I've heard this story. This is what you were most stoked about. Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's the egg and spoon. Yeah, I was bloody good at that. I didn't put chewing gum on it or anything. There was a genuine balance, but I just seemed to have that. The other kids were all dropping them, and I just sprinted down, and they all came over to check that I hadn't glued it on, But, no, the egg and spoon, the sack race, the three-legged race, I was pretty good at that with some of my mates.
Yeah, it must be the strong core.
Yeah, and the piggyback, I used to piggyback one of my mates and won that. So we ended up with about 6 or 7 ribbons at the Sunday school picnic. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and Edmund Hillary inspired you to reach greatness. Can you tell me the story of how you met Edmund Hillary?
Yeah, he came to Hunanui School, and that's in Nelson, my hometown. And I was 10, so that was 1960. So he came, and a very special guest to our school, and of course us kids are all out in the playing field, in the footy field. And then comes the car and pulls up, and so Edmund comes out. Whoa, we kids, we knew who he was. He was like, he was like our hero.
Yes,
he was, or the country's hero. He was, and of course we all gathered around him, and of course the media were there and took photographs, and then they, did a synopsis of his talk to us kids, and we were in the photograph. And so that was on our refrigerator door for for quite a while. But he told us kids that Mount Everest wasn't high enough for your goals, dreams, and aspirations. And so we as kids thought, there's something outside Mount Everest, this thing greater that we can aim for. and nobody landed on the moon by then, but we knew there was a man in the moon. But so all those sort of things come together and swirl around and inspire you, and I think that was something that we thought was pretty good. I was still in Boy Scouts then, so obviously climbing a tree or crossing a river. We always used to say, well, Sir Edmund Hillary told us we could do this, so we'd jump in the river and, of course, get swept away.
And is it something that you continually reminded yourself of as you started to progress through the ranks?
Yes, absolutely. And it was incredibly, because as we went through school, it was, and because what Sir Edmund was doing in Nepal with building hospitals and schools and helping the Nepalese people, that was always in the newspaper about all the good things that he was doing. And of course he went on to do amazing things like going the first man to the South Pole and all that sort of thing. So he was always an inspiration to us. And then of course he was on our $5 banknote. So that was pretty cool to have a $5 banknote with Sir Edmund Hillary on it. So he was always very much part of our circle. Yeah,
and when you were hearing him talk, and now that you look back on it, we always see that a strong, successful culture tends to breed another successful culture from the next generation.
Yes.
When you started running as a junior athlete, were you aware of the deep history of the success that New Zealand runners had?
Oh yes, yes. I think, and I see, we weren't allowed to join a running club till we were 12. So that was, we finished elementary school and we were moving into middle school, and so that was 12 years old when you joined the running club, and it was known as the Nelson Amateur Athletic Harrier and Cycling Club. So it was, and that was formed in 1896. So a lot of history. So we joined the run club, and I remember the first day there was about 300 or 400 just in my age group. These were kids who just loved to do cross country. We'd done cross country in school, and to get that singlet, the club singlet, we were pretty chuffed about that. So that's what got us in. And then of course from there, the history and the dynamic of the club really, it was like another family. We'd have the Harriers on the weekend, and you'd all get together and go and run on a farm or on the beach or in the mountains or on cross country and on the golf course, because some of the times we weren't allowed to run on the golf course, but we kind of outran the golfers. But, now and again they'd whack a ball at you, and we'd of course run back and pick it up and throw it in the ocean. So didn't do that again.
Does that culture still exist with the Harriers there, or has that changed?
No, it's almost lost now. The Harrier clubs don't do it. A lot of the schools have picked up with cross country.
Yep.
But no, the run club or the Harrier clubs on the weekend don't. There is a lot more midweek. Running groups. They get together on a midweek and they have a run. They run at a club or they run at the beach. But a lot of people do their own thing. And the events now, there's pretty well an event every weekend, a fun run, a 5K, 10K, cross country. And those events really have taken over from the Harriers now.
They have, haven't they? And especially when you have the park run element, where it's a free event, 5,000 metres, and it's every weekend. I know Australian athletics is trying to reinvent itself almost.
Yeah, I think that'd be better off just having an alliance with Parkrun. Parkrun's worldwide. I think you've just got to go with the development and what's that's when I worked with the city of Los Angeles and the marathon, we reached out to all the clubs, made sure that we were very much part of what they were doing and supportive, and it was really based on community.
Yep.
Getting together with the community and the people, and anybody who belonged to a running group always, got newsletters from us, and we communicated with them. Always gave them, you get in early, we'll give you a good discount on their entry fees. And then we're going to do these weekend runs where we get together with a particular running store, and we would support that.
Yep.
So it really was just working with what the running community, where it was going and what they were wanting from the marathon and support. So I think that's what it was. And United States Track and Field really weren't involved in a lot of that because they just weren't able to mobilize as quick as some of the other people.
Yeah, and okay, when you were 18 years old, you watched or you listened to the Mexico City Olympic Games. Is that right?
Yes.
And that's when you decided that running was going to be your life.
Well, I think it was at one of the defining moments. I think I was always fascinated, especially when, so at 12 years old, you go to middle school, and then so you have 2 years of middle school, then you go to high school. And so that sort of middle school, high school, I started reading a lot more. Mm. And I was fascinated by, the books like, Jack Lovelock, New Zealand's Jack Lovelock, 1936 Olympics. I was fascinated with the books on the 1948 Olympics. And then, of course, in 1948, Harold Nelson, who was one of our teachers, he was actually at the 1948 Olympics and competed. So all those, I love those history books. There was a book, The Kings of Distance, and that was Alfred Schraub and Deerfoot and all those back in the 1800s. And I was fascinated. They weren't called runners; they were called pedestrians.
Yeah.
And and you could see them there with their long shorts right down to their knees and the long sleeve tops, and they would stand there, not crouched on the start. They would stand on the start, and they would run between ropes. They were separated by ropes. So all that sort of thing fascinated me. The history of the sport.
Yeah. And
so I think that laid a nice pattern to how I matured into the sport. I wasn't up until 17, 18. I could finish in the top 5 or 10 sometimes. I certainly wasn't the best runner in the club. Now and again, when we had races, we sometimes say, okay, the first shall be last, and so last shall be first, and we'd have these races where you'd reverse the grid, and sometimes you get a win. That was kind of cool. But it there wasn't anything driving me to try and be the best. I just loved the run club. I just loved my friends and having fun, and going to school and running. The teachers figured out that you couldn't keep young Rodney Dixon sitting for too long because he got easily bored.
Yeah.
They'd send me off with a note to another teacher, and of course they knew that all I did was go out the door and run around the school and drop the note off and run round back again, and that's what they knew to do for me.
Yeah, you would have been the messenger in the army back in the day.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, your brother John, he was inspiration for you to begin running more seriously, wasn't he?
Yeah, I did. I actually say that Sir Edmund Hillary was my inspiration. My brother was my hero.
Yeah, okay.
So John really, he was 3 years older, you see, and of course, he would say, of course you can climb that tree, of course you can swim that river, or of course you can do this. And he said, I remember him saying to me way early, his favorite 3 words was learn by doing. And so he said, if you climb that tree, learn how you climb the tree, because you're going to have to climb down it. So you need to learn what branch you're on and to get down. Learn if I throw you in the river and you get swept away, you learn not to fight the current. Wait till it goes into a corner where it gets calmer, and then you can swim across to the side. So he was like that. And being that 3 years older, when Arthur Lydiard, the great coach, used to come around to our clubs and talk and coach the coaches, John understood the principles and philosophy of training, and that was very good because he was able to adapt the Lydiard system to how we were living in the South Island in Nelson. I would go to John and say, look, I'm fascinated the way Herb Elliott runs and trains, and Percy Cerruti. And so we would get the book on Percy Cerruti, and we would listen and learn from reading how, running on the beach and doing lifting weights and eating trail mix and all those little things that Percy Cerruti had. And then Franz Stampel, of course, in Europe with Tabori and all those athletes. So it was fascinating to read a lot about coaches and then to adapt their philosophy into how we were training. And John was able to do that. He had a wonderful skill to do that.
And this was obviously a very progressive time in the history of running and coaching running and running philosophy, because you had Emil Zatopek, who was introducing sort of the high volume intervals, and Lydiard with his long runs and his mileage, and Cerruti with his strength training. How would you describe John's philosophy? Was he predominantly a Lydiard type coach, or
yeah, predominantly, and I'd say that's 60 to 70%. But I think also too, having he wasn't okay. I'm going to say 60% influenced by Lydiard, but I'd say the principles might have been 40%, and John's adaptation was 20%, and then we would look at other ideas and other ways and say, what do you think about this training? And he would look at it and he goes, well, that's okay, but we're not at altitude.
Yeah.
So that type of training doesn't really apply to us because we're not living at 3,000 or 4,000 feet. We went to the mountains and ran, but New Zealand didn't have a lot of plateaus at 5,000-6,000 feet. We had mountains, but you couldn't really train there. So we sort of started to work away from seeing not living at altitude as being a disadvantage. We just trained to our environment and made the best of what we could from that, and I think that worked well for me.
And do you think that's why a lot of New Zealanders have such great range is due to the Lydiard influence in the country?
Yes, I do think that. I think the Lydiard, as I keep saying, principles and philosophy, it's the backbone. It is the foundation. Now, how you build your pyramid or how you build your building or but you got to have that foundation, and that foundation is based on aerobic training. And so we knew to always lay that foundation, and you're only as good, so your upper levels were only as good as your foundation. So if you shortcut on your conditioning and your aerobic training, then you weren't able to develop your anaerobic training quite as good because the foundation wasn't there. So the foundation was very, very important to lay that down. And we did it, and of course we made time for it. Of course today, with every year, there's indoors, there's outdoors, there's European circuit, there's the World Championships, there's the Olympics, there's Commonwealth, there's university games. A lot of the kids are not laying that foundation the same.
Yeah,
they turn to be doing a lot more anaerobic work. And that won't build strength. It won't build your core. So you've got to get back to your core.
And did you ever run the Waitarua circuit?
Yes.
Did I say that right?
Yeah, Waitarua, exactly.
Yep.
I did that when I went to Auckland. I went to go up and stay with a couple of friends, and I went and did it. And I found it incredibly hard. But what I didn't like is that it was half of it was road and very hilly, and then the other half was running down the sidewalk, which was basically concrete sidewalks. And that really, having run in Nelson and the forest and the trails and the mountains and on the farmland and forest trails off-road, you weren't going to put me on the tar seal and the concrete. I didn't like that at all.
Yeah, in my head, it's built up to be this magical run through the mountains. It doesn't sound like that.
No, it was the Waitarua forest. It was fabulous to run on, but you're still running on the road, and you had to run on the side because there's traffic. Whereas we would sometimes go out here for 2.5 hours, and you wouldn't see a car.
Yeah.
You'd just be running on old railway trails or hiking trails. And in fact, you see, Nelson has 3 national parks all on the top of the South Island. So we were running some of the famous Abel Tasman tracks on a Sunday, and we would run for nearly 3 hours and never see anybody.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
Amazing.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And that seems to be a real trait of the best running cultures in the world, like forests and long Sunday runs.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely. I'm sure of that. And Deke with his group in Canberra there at the Stromlo Forest, I went and had a run there, and I loved it. I loved the forest.
Yes.
And I could see why they all gathered there, and of course Deke was the catalyst for it all.
Yeah, definitely, and it spreads around the country very quickly. Yeah. Now, your easy runs, you go out for an aerobic jog. How would you describe that sort of pace to someone? Was it conversational?
Yes.
How fast did you run?
No, talk test.
Yeah.
So, most of our Sunday runs, of course, the first few miles was getting over the hangover from the night before. And so it was, but no, I think a lot of the time, at least for the first hour, we would often run to the slowest member of the group, so that they got themselves a run aerobically, that they got theirs done, and then it would be, we would come to a fork in the track, and the slower group would go left and the faster group would go right, or sometimes we had 2 or 3 choices, and we would split up into 3 groups and say, okay, we'll see you back at the park.
Yeah.
We're going on. We're all heading off up the trails here, and this is going to be a 2.5 hour run for us. And some of the others said, well, we're turning back. We've done half an hour. We're only running an hour today. The slower group, that would be the slower group, and then the middle group, where they would say, well, we're going to come with you for another half hour, and then we're going to turn around. So that was a good thing about our trail runs. We had different groups. But then once you got into that core group, the 15 or so, 10 to 15 of your guys, John or one of the older guys would say, come on, you guys, this is not a race. So you tended to, just push one another. And so we, as John would say, he'd come up and grab my ear and he says, no, you're not going. You come back here. He'd pull my ear off. So he said, it's not about today. It's about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of next week. It's not today. So this is what you're going to do. Now and again, he would see, where the course was, and he knew what was going. And now and again, he'd let us go. And of course, away we'd go. Oh, he's not yelling at me. So we'd go give it a go and give each other a go. And of course, he figured that out, that this run today was to just let us go wild, and because there's nothing important the following week or the following 10 days was not important. So he said, no, let's run them off their feet, and they'll spend the next week just doing light runs, beach runs, and then we're getting into the track, or we're getting into the hills, and that's when we'll curtail them again. So that was a very strong component of the club, that they all the senior guys tended to work together and look after us younger guys. And I'm saying, between us 14-year-olds, 18, 19, so that was a big influence for me, running it with the groups like that.
Yeah, I love it. And it would have been, how important for John to be there right in the mix, seeing exactly how hard you're working.
Yes.
Yeah, on your long runs and your workouts.
Exactly. He was there. And as certainly for 18 through 2021, John I would have my workouts, and he would do the first 2 with me, then he'd drop out for 2 and watch me and time me, and then he'd come in for the next 2, and then he'd come in the last 2, and see, he would be able to then say, right, well, you tuck in behind me, and he would set the pace, and on those last 2, which tend to be, or the last 3, which tend to be the ones where you kind of struggle a bit because you want to maintain the balance. But John made sure that I didn't overtrain those last 3, and that I ran solidly, but I wasn't full effort. If he said you run 3/4 effort, some of those last ones were sometimes full effort when I was trying to make it look good for him. But you see, he saw all through that.
Yeah.
He was able to balance it and to curtail it. And his big thing was, I want you to train tomorrow, tomorrow, the next day, and the next day. So what we're doing today is based on the last 2 days. Then what we do today is then relative to the next 3 days. So he always had the 5-day cycle, the 5-day cycle.
Yeah. And he helped you through a few races as well.
Oh, yeah.
I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you feel like you were a bit of a team out there during those initial, like when you used to run with him on the track?
Yeah, isn't it interesting? It was always my brother. I never saw it as being a team.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So it was my bro.
Yeah. It's funny. There's two big New Zealanders now, the Robertson twins. I'm sure they would have had a similar effect back in the day.
Yep.
We'll talk about them a little later. Now, the life of a professional athlete, Rod, you travelled a lot with Dick Quacks and John Walker.
Yeah.
Were they your main travelling partners?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that really, I made my first national team was 1971 cross country, and I finished 10th in the world cross country that year, which was, I think a bit of a fright to a lot of people. I don't think they expected me to be that far up. First trip away, I hadn't even turned 21.
Yeah.
And then of course came back, and the goal, I remember John saying to me, because they said, well, young Dixon, the Olympics the next year, he could very well be going to the Olympics. And so I think, when I came back and John and I talked, and he said, well, why don't we look at the New Zealand cross country? Why don't we look at the Olympic trials? Why don't we look at the Olympic qualification times? Now, you still haven't broken 4 minutes for a mile, so that's got to be in there. So there was quite a few things that we actually laid out, and we put them in sequence so that we knew that we were working towards a goal.
Yeah.
And so the Olympic trials really were the goal, and then we had to have all these intermediate goals which were going to lead us. It's like Sir Edmund Hillary climbing Everest. He didn't look at the top. He said, well, base 1, camp 1, camp 2, camp 3, camp 4. You had to have base camp, blah, blah, blah. So we had to have all these goals where we said, right, well, we're going to be training and preparing for this goal. Then if we reach that, when we reach that, we're going to figure out how far off our goal. Did we reach our goal? Were we short of our goal? What do we need to do? And the good thing about it is that we set realistic goals, and each time we came to that plateau, we achieved what we had set for ourselves. And so we were able to go to the next level and the next level. And I remember a couple of times I looked at John and I said, we've got about 4 ticks already, And he said, well, I didn't think we'd have 4. I thought we'd have a couple, but we didn't think maybe 3 would be good, but we've actually got 4. So those are the sort of things that we were able to discuss, and as brothers, not as coach athlete, as brothers. And so there was a little bit more, how would we say it, spirit between the two of us, a very powerful connection between us because of that brother. The brothers.
Yeah. Did John go on and become a successful coach outside of yourself? Did he have other athletes?
Mm-hmm. He did have other athletes. He coached an American girl to the 1988 Olympic Marathon. So she finished second in the USA Olympic trials and went to the Olympics and was the first American home. Her name was Nancy Dietz. So he coached her, really. I mean, I introduced them because I saw that Nancy had tremendous talent, and she wanted me to coach her, and I said no, because that's not, I think it's more appropriate that my brother is your coach.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind being part of it all, but no. So, and then there was a number of young kids in this country who became national champions, and but you see, the thing is, Gillian, that we didn't have a coach's structure in New Zealand, and Athletics New Zealand didn't recognise people like my brother and didn't understand the value that he potentially had for others. And so all the coaches kind of did their own thing, and when you went away on a trip, somebody who had peeled the oranges got to be the coach. It was unbelievable.
I think Arthur Lydiard ran into this struggle too, didn't he?
Absolutely. Yeah. They never selected Arthur to be a coach because it was a thing that if you give service to your club or your centre, you often got to be a manager or a coach or something. And the coaches that came away from us had no idea, absolutely no idea how to talk, to work with the athletes. Some of them were very good communicators, and they became good friends, but they never interfered with the training or the schedules. And I think that some of us used to talk that was a pity that such and such couldn't understand the principles of coaching, and they would have been a lot better. We would have been a lot better served by them being a little bit more. But you see, there was no coaching certifications. There was no coaches certificates or clinics, and so we really, all the athletes kind of did their own thing.
Yeah,
and we were left alone to do our own thing, and that was why we were successful.
So when you were travelling with Dick and John Walker, would you work out together in Europe, or would you do your own training and they would do their own training? Well,
we would talk about what we had to do today. We knew each other's strengths and weaknesses, and so I didn't train with John when he said he was going to do 10 400s at 52 seconds. That was not going to happen to me. Yep. But I would say to John, well, why don't you do 15 at 57 with me? And he said, no, I don't want to do 15. Yeah, so we would our long runs, our easy aerobic runs, John would often come with me, but he would turn around and go back. He said, no, that's enough for me, running with you, Dixon. And I would do the same when I would be on the track and he would do a time trial 800 and 151. I'd say, nope, it's not something I want to do today. So, but now and again, we were very, very compatible when we had. I said, well, look, John, I've got this, and he said, I've got this, and we say, okay, well, look, I don't mind coming down a second, but you've got to slow down a second, or something like that.
Yeah.
So we would compromise, but by and large, between races, it really was. It was a 45-minute, 50-minute easy run in the forest, or we both would do that aerobically. If we went to the track and he wanted to do 400s or 300s or 200s, he would do it. But if we did some 150 stride outs or 600 easy, I would do that with John. So we figured it out. Now, Quaxie was a little different because he was already starting to move to 5,000, 10,000, and some of his training just didn't suit me as a 1,500 meter runner, and John was still running 815. But as we moved up, we tended to sort of get along really well. We travelled brilliantly, we roomed brilliantly, but we just didn't have to compromise on our training.
And the bathtub beers, Rod, I hear about this bathtub beers a lot. Was this your doing?
The bathtub beers?
Yeah. Where did this come from?
Well, that was, you see, we would all, and I mentioned Graham Crouch before, because Crouchy, we came along, and the guy called Ken Hall. Just great, some great Aussies. Peter Fitzsimmons. We'd all get together, and we'd say, okay, now we've got a week here where we haven't got a race. So what we're going to do is we're going to give this guy a call in Umeå in Sweden and see if we can all go up there, and he give us a week's accommodation. And of course, a lot of the sport hotels were often agricultural colleges, which would be summer hotels. So we would be put in there, and we'd have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and accommodation, hostel accommodation, and that was all we wanted, as long as we were near forest trails or lakes or where we could train. And then we'd say, okay, guys, so now we've got to have a bit of pocket money. And so what we'd do is say, right, well, whoever wins the race here, we want you to, so whoever wins this race has got to fill the bathtub with beer. And of course, so some of us would say, well, why don't we let Walker win, because he's getting paid more than we are, then he can fill the bathtub with beer. and John would, he'd go out there and race, and because he figured out after 2 or 3 times, he said, you guys are setting me up.
And is this where the famous quote, all I want to do is drink beer and train like an animal, is this where that came from?
I think probably that might have been back in the old club days.
Do you remember saying that?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I wished I'd been remembered for something a bit better. But no, it was that was, I think I'm not sure where it actually, who picked up on it. It might have been in England where somebody, John said that he wants to go on to the Olympics, and he wants the gold medal, and they said, well, Dixon, you haven't said much on this. And I said, all I want to do is train like an animal and drink lots of beer. And I got landed with that one.
There's a lot of people who sympathise with that quote, or who really. I probably drink a little bit too much beer, but I love the idea of training like an animal, and they're the two things that I love doing. So it speaks to me, and I mean, I'll be honest, Rod. That's how I first knew you. And then, and then once I got to know a little bit more about your story, I thought I need to have this guy in the store on a big wall. And so you're kind of getting a little bit like you're telling the story of day-to-day life of an athlete on the European circuit. Was it fun, or was it hard work?
Well, it was a mix. It was a mix of, you definitely had to, our thing in that day, because there was no professionalism, the word amateur was still very much reminded. We were reminded every day. The New Zealand Amateur Athletic Association, the British board was the British Amateur Athletic Association, and they were very, very firm on any payments or any funding which didn't meet within those amateur rules. Forget the people who were running the show were all multi-millionaires, but they had to. So it was very difficult. So really, what it came down to is we couldn't really say, okay, these are the main races I'm going to run this season in Europe. We have to. You're only as good as your last race. So if you want to, so here we are in, say in Denmark. Now, if you want to go and run in Oslo, you've got to win here in Denmark. And if you win in Denmark, you'll get an air ticket to Oslo, and you'll get you get accommodation, meals. And you'll probably now, because you won that race, we'll maybe give you $250. Now, if you come to Oslo and win, we'll give you the same amount again. But if you don't win in Oslo, and you want to go on to Stockholm, then you'll be catching the bus. So what it really meant is that you were only as good as your last race. So you had to try and be in the top 3 every time you raced.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Sometimes going out after a race time, or to get the fastest time was going to impact on your next performance. Mm. So you'd run in Oslo on the Saturday, but you were running in Stockholm on the Wednesday, and you weren't able to go out and run close to a world record and expect then to travel to Stockholm and be ready to run well at Stockholm. You needed really 10 days recovery.
Yeah.
We couldn't afford 10 days off because you had to pay for your meals and your travel. So you really had to balance it all out and be consistent. And in those early days for us, we were running 30 races in the season.
Yeah.
And some of those races, of course, the race director said, well, Dixon, we don't want you to run 1,500. We want you to run 5,000. I said, well, how much? We'll pay you twice as much to run 5,000. And I said, well, I'd rather run 1,500 because I got a 5,000 at the end of the week in Finland. And, so it just really, you were the negotiator, the runner, the trainer, the coach, the banker. You were everybody. You had to try to figure it all out.
And you're just on the phone to meet directors? Is this how you're communicating?
Well, a lot of the meet directors would be at the events.
Oh, okay.
And so a lot of them would come, see, I would always open my season with the British Championships. And because the Brits didn't pay you, but they would give you air tickets. So you figured out, okay, we'll get the air tickets out of the Brits and run there. And then a lot of the European and Scandinavian race directors would come to the British champs to identify who they wanted for their races.
Yes.
And so if you ran well in the British champ, you had a number of people coming up to you and talking to you.
Okay.
And that began it. And as you say, the phone call. Everything was based on phone calls. We didn't have fax in those days. Sometimes you could go to a hotel and get their telex to send a message, but most of it was by phone.
Yes.
And you had to go into a phone box, and you had to phone somebody at a phone in their house. So it was a lot of work between, I can tell you.
Yeah. Let's talk about Munich Olympics. So this was, you won a bronze medal in the 1,500 meters. Did you consider yourself a chance of a medal going into the championships?
No. I think when, as I said before, in 1971, when I came back from the World Cross Country, we ticked that off, and we ticked off a couple of other things. And as we worked towards, and I think as soon as I broke the 4-minute mile, and that was in January of 72, that was the first time I broke the 4 minutes. And John said, you've got to start thinking about the Olympics. And he said, and what event do you think? And he said, it kind of looked, you ran well in world cross country, probably the 5,000 meters. And I said, no, John, I want to run the 1,500. And he looked at me and he says, you want to be a miler, don't you? And I said, yeah, I want to be a miler. I want to follow in Jack Lovelock and Peter Snell and John Davies and Hellberg. I want to, and Herb Elliott. Herb Elliott was a big hero of mine in 1960 for sure.
Yep.
From the 60 Olympics. So I want to be like these people. And he said, well, let's do it. And it was like, oh, you're not going to try and talk me out of it? And he said, no. He said, you've made a commitment. He said, I'll just tell you what you've got to do. and if you complain, I'll remind you it was your choice.
Yeah. Good of him to point that out.
Yeah. So, and of course, and then, once he said, well, first of all, let's get this run in Wellington, and that was going to be the mile. And I went over there, and some of the runners who I was running against towards the Olympics, Tony Polhill, of course, had won the British Championships the year before, and so he had qualified, and so he didn't turn up for that run. But Dick Taylor and Kevin Ross and a couple of others, we all ran, and of course I won it and broke the 4-minute mile. And John was there, my brother was there, and he said, well, we've got to make this announcement because the media wanted to know, well, what's going to happen now? Dixon's beaten all the other contenders. He's broken the 4-minute mile. He's got to be thinking about the Olympics. And they said, well, what event are you going to do? And I said, the 1500. Well, you had all these people say, no, he shouldn't be running that. He should be running the cross country. I mean, he should be running the 5,000, or he should be running steeplechase, maybe a steeplechase. And so John and I had to weather a bit of criticism because John said that's our goal, and they criticized him. He said, well, the coach, has he been an influence, or has he allowed the athlete to be an influence? And so we just weathered the storm. And the good thing with Nelson, of course, we just came back to Nelson and laid low and carried on training. And we weathered the storm. And then, of course, I went out and won the Olympic trials and broke the Olympic qualifying time. And so, the rest, suddenly people said, well, they actually know what they're doing.
Yeah, he's a player.
Yeah. Yeah.
In Munich, with the hostage situation and the act of terrorism, was that before or after your race?
No, that was day before.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
The heats. So and New Zealand were right next to the Israelis. In fact, my room with Dick Taylor and Terry Manners, we were the end room within about 50 meters of the Israeli quarters, so we could see them, and they would often walk past our front, and we would often talk to them, and so we get to know some of them. So of course when we heard the pop of the rifle fire. Well, they weren't because they were muted, and we heard it, and I said, What do you think that's going on over there? And they said, oh, it's probably the athletes testing their gun
pistols. Yeah.
And then in the morning we had a bang bang on our door, and they said, you've got to get your passport and get out. And we said, why? He said, well, there's been a hostage situation. And then Dick Taylor looked out and he said, oh, there's some guy on the Israeli quarters with a balaclava and a gun. And we looked out, and that was that image of the terrorist, or the Black September, with that AK-47 with the balaclava on. And we saw him live. And we thought, holy hell. We didn't understand, of course, when we were evacuated. And then it all started to transpire. And it was so sad that our Olympic Games were so violated.
Yeah.
And of course, there was the negotiation was going on. They got them out of the village, and then of course we heard that they were blown up at the airport, and it was just sadness.
Yeah.
See, and the next day they put a hold on the games, and Avery Brundage asked the committee whether the games should be cancelled. And the Israelis said, absolutely, you do not cancel the games. Those athletes, we are subject to this every day of our lives, potential terrorist threats against us. The athletes gave their lives for the Olympic Games, and that must continue on to give them the honour that the games will continue, and that we're not going to bow to terrorism. And in New Zealand, I mean, not that we were consulted, but New Zealand were absolutely positive in their stance against this. So we, and it was a funny sort of thing, because I put a little red ribbon on my tracksuit when I warmed up, and that was my respect for those athletes.
And it must have affected you. I mean, it affected everyone, obviously, but was there a bit of a somber feeling around the village and even throughout the stadium for the rest of the Olympics?
I think what it was once we heard the Israelis ask us to hold our heads high and honour the athletes, then and be as you were for the spirit of the games. I think we all stood up and we said, we're going to make this the best games ever. We're going to turn this around and make it something to honour these athletes. So I think we weren't down. I think we were very inspired by the fact that we were going to put this behind us and go out there and do the best we can. And I think in a sense, warming up and acknowledging, that this was going to be the best that I can be.
Yes, that all makes sense. I'm reading Marty Licuri's book at the moment, and he mentions that going into the 76 Olympics, he was certain that you were going to win the 5,000 metres. He was quite certain of it. Were you as confident as he was going into that Olympic Games?
Well, I think, I'll say yes, because that's what it was all about. That was the goal. That was the, I'd ranked number one in the world in 75, and I'd raced against Marty a few times, and I know that he couldn't get the measure of me. In 73, 74, we ran quite a few 1500s, and we were very, very closely matched. But as soon as I started running 2 miles, and I just missed the world record for 2 miles on 3 occasions, and then I ran against the best in the 5,000 and beat them. And I one of them I ran away from the field. Another one I sat and out-kicked them all. And then another race I did a Hellberg with 2 laps to go. I sprinted as hard as I could. and so these guys were going, shit, this guy can run from anywhere.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a pattern. So I think, and that was the idea, was to give them all a bit of a shock and say, you may as well just lie down and let me win. Yeah.
And it obviously didn't quite play out like that. You found yourself in a bit of trouble with 200 out.
Yeah. And I would have been a lot happier having the Africans in the race, because they would have ensured that the pace was more front running than European, which tend to be sit and sprint. Although, I was still the fastest in the field. I remember talking to my brother about 2 days before, and he said, I want you in the lead at 300 to go, and you run. You don't try and out-sprint these guys. At 300 meters, I want you to be in control. And you go to the front, and as they challenge you, you just hold them off and run them wide. And of course, with 300 meters to go, I'm thinking, I've got this. And with 200 meters to go, I think I'm still right where I should be. And then all of a sudden, it all hell let loose. Quacks went past, Hildebrand went past, Veron was still on the inside lane, holding everybody off, and I panicked, and I sprinted, and I ran in lane 3 to try and run them all down. But you see, as you look at lane 3 and look at lane 1, you're running about 6 or 7 more meters.
Yeah.
And that's, and I lost the race by 3 meters, really effectively, because less than a second separated us.
Were you surprised at Lassie Veron's comeback for that Olympics from being in relative obscurity for the previous 3 years since the 72 Olympics?
I knew what was going on. I knew what was going on with the Finns, and I knew what was going on with some of the Scandinavians, and of course some of the Eastern Bloc countries. We knew what was going on with Performance Enhancer, and so. But I thought to myself, I've raced him enough. I know how to race Veron, and whatever he does, he's not going to beat me. But by hell, he beat us.
Yeah. Was it difficult to sit in a call room with those guys beforehand, knowing that they were doing something that wasn't morally right at the time?
Yeah, it was. All I wanted was a level playing field. I don't mind I never had a problem with running against anybody. I wanted to run against the best in the world, but don't tell me you have an advantage that I don't have an opportunity to. And my thing, of course, I would have if I'd been given the option, I probably still wouldn't have done it, because when you grow up in a family and your mother says all you've got to remember, you don't have to remember anything else but to tell the truth. And of course, if she ever asked me to tell the truth, I would tell her the truth. It's got me into trouble, of course it has. But I never, I always thought if my parents ever asked me, did you do this, this, and this, and I said no, and I knew I was lying to them, that would be the end of it.
Yeah,
I know, because she'd figure it out. She'd know. So I had this moral, family honesty, truth. So I couldn't do anything like that. I accepted the consequence of any disappointment, or if I wasn't fast enough this day, it wasn't because I didn't do my best. I did my best. That was all. Yeah. It's kind of interesting.
And that fourth place, 5,000 metre Olympics, 4 years earlier, Steve Prefontaine also got passed very late for a bronze medal in the fight. Did you ever chat with Pre about?
Oh yeah. We ran a 2 mile after the Olympics in London, and he because he stepped down from 5,000 meters, I stepped up from 1,500, and it was I ran a British and Commonwealth record. I ran a New Zealand record. He ran a American record. So we ran something like 8:15 or 8:16, which was the world's fastest at that time, the world leader. And so it was a great race. But of course, he came over to me after and said, actually said bloody Kiwi. And I said, what's your problem? And he said, well, you just sat on me. And I said, well, what did you want me to do? You were the perfect pace leader. And he said, well, you could have helped me. And I said, no, we were here to win the race. I wasn't here to, And so he got quite upset with me. But it wasn't until 73 when we ran another couple of races together. And one of them, I just wouldn't let him pass me. And him and I were sprinting down the back straight, and then he'd get behind me, and then he'd try me in the middle, and I just kept, surging. and I think he realised that he's got to learn the European way of racing and not expect it to be the way he's used to it. Yeah. So we became great mates. We became great mates. He travelled very extensively with Pre, and we were going to in 76. 75, he was going to come to New Zealand and train during the summer, and then we would go to Colorado and train with him during the US summer.
Yes.
Of course, we lost him in May of 75.
Very sad.
Very sad.
We'll move on to your marathon, which is the classic. Well, for me, it's a classic story of someone signing up to a marathon. I don't think anyone signed up to a marathon better than what you have. Can you tell us about the World Cross Country race where you essentially locked in your marathon?
Interesting. Well, of course, I moved to road racing because of the boycott in 1980. And so I was. Of course, you had that the memory of 76, and I wanted 1980 to. And so I trained for 4 years towards that, and then New Zealand boycotted, and I go, why? What? But we 34 countries probably asked the same question, but whatever. So I moved. I was actually in the US when the boycott was announced. Walker and the track team, we were on our way to Moscow when the boycott was announced. And I said, well, I'm not going to Europe. There's no point. I don't have any value in going to the Olympics if I'm going to Europe to race if I can't go to the Olympics. And there's a road race, a 10K road race next week that Bill Rogers is running. And I met Bill in the 70s 78, 79 in Europe, and I, became friends. So I called Bill, and he said, yeah, I can get you into the race. It was a road race in Philadelphia. And so I went to the race, and I finished third. And it was my very first road race. And, I'd run club road races, but this was the first American road race. And, of course, there were 6,000 people in the race. I was fascinated by it. Mm-hmm. And there again, you finish first, second, third up on the podium, and you got thousands of people think you're cool.
Yeah. There's a Hollywood element.
Yeah. I said, I can do this. So I said to Arch Jelly and the guys, I said, no, I'm not going to come with you to Europe. There's another road race in a week's time, and I've been invited to stay here in Philadelphia and train with some of the local runners. And so I did. I stayed, and then I went and ran in a place called Wyomissing. No, it was Adamstown, and it was a beer fest race. And it was a 10K, and I went out and I ran it, and I took 2 minutes off the record, and it was held by American record holder Greg Fredericks. And people were saying, well, he must have cut the corners because you couldn't possibly take 2 minutes off the American record holder. And they said, well, no, he followed the pace car the whole time, and we watched him. He didn't get a ride anywhere. He didn't take a shortcut. And of course it became big news that this guy Dixon had gone out and done this. But what I loved about it is that Adamstown, it was a beer festival, so it was part of a big festival weekend. And there was about 6,000 runners, and it was really hilly road. And what they did is that the winner got his weight in beer.
Excellent.
And so the local guys came over, and they all introduced him. They goes, well, we just, when you go up to get the prize, he said, why don't you wear this jacket? I go, okay, I'll wear a jacket. I put the jacket on, and it had buckshot in it, so it was like 20 pounds. Right? And I put the jacket on, and I went up, and here's the winner, and it weighing at 197 pounds.
That's perfect.
And so then he gets 20 gallons of beer, and I said, I know why you guys gave me that jacket, because you want to drink my beer.
Classic gag by the fellas.
Yeah. So all that stuff, Julian, is just, those are the magic moments of what I did and when I travelled and what we did, and those are the moments that kept me. And then of course I ended up living very close to Adamstown. I got an apartment in a place called Flying Hills, which is very appropriate for a runner. Mm-hmm. In fact, my street address was 75 Winged Foot Drive, Flying Hills. And so I brought the family over, and we set up shop, and away I went. And I ran road races and set records, and it was exactly my journey. I just knew it was.
And you won New York City Marathon.
Yeah. Well, I went. I realized in 81, 80 of course being the boycott and everything else, was going to be Olympic year. So 81, I thought, no, if I'm going to be successful at road racing, I've got to run the world cross country. I've got to go home to New Zealand and train, and I want to run cross country because that has been traditional for me. It gives me the basis for everything I do. And so I ran the world cross country in 81, and I finished 10th. And I never complain, but I did have terrible stomach problems, and I just was slightly off colour. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I came back and ran brilliantly all that year, and then 82. I said, right, well, I'm going to do this again. I'm going to go to the World Cross Country. And by that stage, I'd, of course, run the world's fastest half marathon, and I was winning. I was just winning just about everything from 10K to half marathon, 10 milers, 7 milers, 8 milers, 9 milers, and I was just pretty dominant. And but I went to the World Cross Country in '82, and of course all the race directors from around the world were fascinated. They all came to the World Cross Country, and we used to have these great lunches and all talk around and meet them all. And I remember Fred LeBeau came over and he said, "Rod Dixon, you have to run the New York City Marathon." And I said, "I've been thinking about running a marathon, but I'm not going to do it this year." And of course he wouldn't leave me alone. And of course London and Chicago and San Francisco race directors were all, "Why don't you come and run our race?" and da-da-da. And I said, "No." I said, "But I'll tell you what." I said to Fred LeBeau, I said, "I'll tell you what, Fred. If I run really well here at the World Cross Country," and this was in Rome, "if I run really well, I will consider running the marathon." And he said, "Well, what's run well you are?" And I said, "First, second, or third." So he said, "Oh, okay." And so, of course, I'm coming down the end of the World Cross Country in third place and cross the finish line. And, you go into the finish chutes, and here's this guy standing in the middle of the chute. And I go, "What do you..." And then I realised it's Fred. I said, "Fred, you're not meant to be in here." And he said, "I just want to make sure that you're going to come to New York." And I said, "Well, Fred, it's not going to be this year because I've got another 30 races. So it won't be this year, but I will come and watch the race and I will immerse myself in the marathon." Well, I must admit, Julian, I went to New York and watched an incredible race with Salazar and Gomez duking it out. And I said, "That's me. I can see myself running a race like that. I would love to run a marathon like that." And so as I left New York, I think I had a run in Central Park in the morning, and I said to myself, "Yep, I'm going to run this thing." And then I think maybe about 2 or 3 weeks later, I went back for the midnight race, New Year's Eve midnight race in Central Park, and Fred LeBeau came up and he said, "Have you made a decision?" And I said, "It's 3 minutes past midnight of 1983. And I said, "All right, Fred, I'll run New York this year." And so that was 11 months away. So once I said to Fred I would, then I planned everything with my brother John, and he said, "Right, this is what you've got to do. You've got to immerse yourself in the most consistent training you've ever done in your life." He said, "And you're not to be distracted. You're not to be, you've got to be focused." And so I made that commitment, and I did. And it was incredible. I just stayed absolutely focused. And month by month, week by week, day by day, it was all coming together. It was like that big giant pyramid that we'd all dreamed about way back. That's how you build. You build a pyramid from the base up.
So you didn't change too many specific things before the marathon? It was just about getting a lot of the same sort of training in.
Yeah, I think there was those long Sunday runs, which were just that little bit longer, a little bit slower, but a lot. So there were those long runs, and of course I did that all in the Pennsylvania countryside. In fact, bordering on the Amish country. So there were fabulous roads and trails, and very, very little traffic. I think some mornings all I saw were horse and carts. That's all I saw.
Wow.
And some of the Amish, it was interesting because there was a couple of times there I got really dehydrated, and I went into one of the farms and I said, "Can I drink some water out of the horse trough?" And the guy looked at me and said, No, you don't drink out of the horse trough. He said, "You come over to the house and I'll give you some water." And so, of course, I went over to the house and he just said, "Now you wait there." And I waited, and he came out with a big jug of water and he gave me it. And I thanked him so, because I was starting to struggle. I was starting to get quite dehydrated. And then, from then on, he had a little box at his gate, and they used to put water there every Sunday morning for me when I went past.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah, awesome. I wonder if they ever found out what you were doing.
Yeah, I did. I went and gave them one of my medals, with just a finisher's medal. I got a whole lot from New York Marathon.
Oh, cool.
And I went and gave them, and I said, thank you, that's to honor your support. Yeah. Pretty cool.
That's a great story, yeah. Now, any nutrition? Did you use anything back then? Was it just, did you use any sugar on the run?
No. I knew, I was very, very aware of the dangers of sugar because it was a spiking effect. So what I did is I would get bananas and rice. I'd get rice. And in fact, my mother did this for us anyway. But so what I would do in my long runs, I would get bananas and rice and mash them up and put them into little, and we didn't have Ziplocs in those days, but they were a corner of a plastic bag, and I'd put that in and then tie a knot and cut the top of the bag off, and I would carry those with me.
Little energy gels.
Yeah, and so I just would bite the end off and drink it. But what I learned after, which was even more effective, was Gerber baby food. And this was bananas and rice, the same what I was making, but this was 27 grams of carbohydrate per serving. Yeah. And so I'd get the big jar and make those up, and then I would go on the Saturday and drop them off at the 16-mile mark and my 23-mile mark, so that I didn't have to carry them. So I would have those, and I knew the tree that I'd put them in the tree. So I'd come past and did it and eat it, and away I'd go. Because there was a lot of those earlier days that I came back, and I couldn't even turn the door handle on the house. I couldn't. I mean, I was hyperglycemic. I was running, staggering. People saw me and they go, "Oh, that guy Dixon. He runs funny, doesn't he?" Because I was on my last legs. So I learned. Once again, learn by doing. So once I figured out how to eat. Because, what we did figure out is that I had probably enough fuel for about 2 hours. And so, and so you had to then say, right, when is your first sign? And the first sign was always around 15 mile and about 18 mile. I'd get that bit of a hyperglycemia. And so I would always, as I said, I'd have, sometimes I would be able to get to 18 all right. So I would have my first gel at around 13 to 15, and then my other one around 23.
And, and you ran the perfect race.
Yeah.
It's hard to describe it as anything but perfect.
Well, it was everything. I mean, of course, we didn't have any telemetry. I just wrote on my fingers, on my little finger, my 5-mile split. The next finger was my 10-mile split. I didn't put my 13-mile because I instinctively what you want to go through. And then so the next finger was 15-mile, the next finger was 18-mile, and then my thumb was 23. So I had the times that I wanted to hit, and that was based on 2 hours 9. Those were the splits.
Wow.
And negative splits.
And you lucky you didn't wipe your nose with that hand.
Yeah.
Now, Rod, tell me about the kids marathon program you're involved with.
Yeah, well, it's how it evolved is, okay. So I'm going to run you back to 1972.
Please, yes.
At the Olympics, and of course the media asked me, well, young Dixon, you were ranked 42nd in the world, and you end up with the bronze medal. And who's your hero and who's your inspiration? And I said, well, my brother is my hero, and Sir Edmund Hillary was my inspiration. And they said, well, have you ever told Sir Edmund? And I said, well, you don't call the Queen and you don't call Sir Edmund, And they said, well, actually, Sir Edmund's name, Hillary Edmund Percival, 282 Remuera Road, Auckland, New Zealand, and the telephone number is in the phone book. He said, so you can call him any time you like. And of course, I lived in the South Island, so of course I was in Auckland in early '73 for a track meet, and I was staying with my great friend Graham Davey, and I looked in the phone book, and there it was again. It was again. So I said, I'm not going to call. I'm going to go round. So I went up to Remuera, found the address, went down the driveway, knocked on the door. And Lady Hillary came to the door, and she said, just a minute, young man. I told her who I was. Just a minute, young man. I'm going to go and get Sir Edmund. And Sir Edmund was home. He was in New Zealand. And he came to the door, and he said, now what can I do for you, young man? And I said, well, Sir Edmund, in 1960, you came to our school, Nelson, Tahunanui. Yes, I remember that. Huh. And he said, and I said, and you inspired us. Oh, that's very fine. That's very fine, young man. And I said, and then I thought I better reach into my pocket because I had my medal with me. See, I reached in my pocket and I pulled out the medal and I said, well, just last year I went to the Olympics and I won this, and I think you inspired me. And he looked at it and he said, this is fine, young man. He said, will you promise me one thing, young Rodney? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, will you inspire the next generation? And I said, oh, yeah, I'll do that for you, sir. And he gave the medal back to me and closed the door. And I stood there and I thought, well, what do I do now? As my mum said, she said, it'll come to you. Don't you worry about it. It will come to you. And well, in 1990, when after the, it's 83, after the New York Marathon, and I tried to run, I just missed out on qualifying for the 88 Olympics by 10 seconds. And then, of course, I started working with television, New Zealand, and promoting the track series, and doing that. And then my local school said that the kids were going to have to be bused to another school because of the funding of the school. They were going to close the school down. There wasn't enough students. And I said, well, what? The kids are going to get on a bus for an hour? They're going to hate the school. They're going to hate, they can ride or walk to school, and they run around bare feet all day. So I talked to a couple of people, and I said, let's try and save the school. So we set up that there's going to be the Rod Dixon Family 5K and 2K Fun Run. And so what I said was, I'm going to get all the kids within the 30-mile radius of this school to get into training. I want them to start training because I want them to come to the Lee School to run their final mile of their marathon, just like Rod Dixon did in 1983. And so that's where it started. And I think the first year we raised about 10 or 12 grand, and I did it for 10 years, raised nearly 60, 70 grand for the school. We built another classroom and a swimming pool, and one of the girls, a young Maori girl, Olivia Haddon, we sent her to Australia with a scholarship. Yeah. And she won the New Zealand. She actually ran the New Zealand Junior 400 meters that year, 1 year. So that's kind of how it started. And each year we would do that. And of course, each year the media would, and then of course, television started coming and filming it, because the All Blacks would come and run, and the cricketers would come and run, and they were supporting it. And of course, television said, well, gee, what's going on up there at that little school? And they came up, and they said, well, where did you get the idea from it? And I said, well, I promised Sir Edmund Hillary I would inspire the next generation, and this is kind of it. And of course, then the next thing is the Lydiard Foundation called me, and the Hillary Foundation called me and said, we see that you're giving credit to Sir Edmund for asking, for doing this. And he said, but you never called him to tell him you're doing it. And I said, well, he never told me to tell him. He just said, do it. So, of course, they said, well, he would like to have morning tea with you. He'd like you to invite you for morning tea. So I went down to his home, the same house. He lived in the same house for 54 years. And a house that him and his father had built after he climbed Mount Everest. And so I went down, and here I am sitting with Sir Edmund, and talking about things. And then about a year or so later, I started my foundation to carry on this inspiring kids to get out there and do their marathon.
And you've spread to the US with this with this type of program.
Yep, you're taking it and doing mainly, and too, Julian, mainly low-income schools, inner-city schools. It didn't take me long to figure out the schools that were most disadvantaged are the low-income schools. Inner city, they didn't have playgrounds. They only had a couple of bloody basketball courts and blacktop and a big fence around them.
Yes.
But I could see that, because of the first three things that get cut with budgets are art, music, and PE. And those are the very three things that kids need between the ages of 5 and 12. And all the research is there now. I've been doing this since 1990, really. But my main program in the US is 12 to 15 years, and over 500,000 kids. But you see, in 12 to 15 years, you can now see the culture has changed in schools. Schools now have art, music, and PE because they know that kids were born to move,
yes,
and to be creative. And the run club is something that is you can run it. It doesn't cost anything. Get the kids to get up and run around the school.
Yeah. Well, we often see it at the younger level, but it seems like when we get higher in our schooling, we put less preference on that and more on the academic side of things.
Yes, we do. Yeah. And yet, we're born to move, and we know what happens with the brain when you sit for too long. It closes down, it shuts down, and now, of course, some of the research that's been coming out of like Norway and Finland, and about how the schools are moving towards stand-up desks, more recess, more creativity, more less of this sit down and shut up stuff, and it really is. It's having an effect, and the kids are changing. And the kids that with the Kids Marathon are definitely changing.
Yeah.
And that piece on 7 Sharp, I sent you that, right?
You did, yeah. We will put that up in our notes because that was a great video.
And that's that school's 5 years, and Leanne, the principal, and the school, they have their school fair festival, and they raise all the money for all their activities for the year from that one event now.
Yeah. And
the kids are so committed to it, and they and most of those kids actually ran 5K for their last, instead of a final mile 2K, they ran 5K.
Yeah, good on them. And
just amazing kids.
We have a lot of, over here they like to call themselves chalkies. I've never heard that since recently. No. Teachers call themselves chalkies because of the chalkboard. And now, how would they introduce this program? Are you got plans to move this program to Australia?
Well, interesting enough, Fran and Dave Cundy, who used to do the Canberra Marathon.
Yes, yep.
Fran had a program exactly the same, Kids Marathon. I came over with my two youngest, Hugo and Cecile. We came over and because up until then it was the Rod Dixon family 5K and 2K fun run, but it was, kids would run the marathon. And they came over, and Fran and Dave had a kids program, a kids marathon program, the same. So we got talking, and then Fran came over to California when I did my first one in LA, and she was very, she said, this is exactly how we do it. And so it did start, but of course they are now no longer with that marathon. And but we've got, there's a couple of events going on with kids, but yeah, once we get it into, see, I'm back home in New Zealand because finally our system here is saying we're ready for this, Dixon. We may not have been 5-10 years ago, but we are ready now because we see child obesity, we see diabetes, we see, what's happening in the schools, and our kids are just not getting enough PE. And they're not moving enough.
Yes.
So I said, so I've been going to the schools, and wonderfully, I my funding just, I put a lot of my personal funding into it, and I don't have a Bill Gates giving me a couple of $1 billion like some of these foundations do, but I think I'm not far off from getting, because it took a while to get it figured out, but you also too recognize that when you're dealing with the school education system, it's very, very difficult to get through the door. The principal is the gatekeeper, and he has very strict, or he or she have very strict guidelines, and it's very hard to introduce something that doesn't fit those guidelines. But slowly but surely, the schools that I have done, and they have adopted it, are now starting to show improved results. And in fact, I've got about 7 schools here in New Zealand, and Malku is very, very a great example, because the teachers and the principals and the community are 100% behind it. But the principals say, the kids that do the run club and they're involved in the kids marathon, on average, have higher test scores than the kids that don't. And then suddenly people take notice.
Yeah, it would be hard to find a problem with it from unless you're a very legislative type, or it sounds like that's what's holding it back, because sometimes you look at a lot of the college programs at the US, and the running team is often the academic team as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a lot of benefit to it.
Yeah. Well, cross country in the US in high school is the highest participation sport.
Wow.
But it drops off dramatically in college, because the academic takes away or demands so much. But the athletes, the runners who I meet in college, if they have participated in kids marathon or middle school or high school running, then they know after halfway through the night or in the morning they get out and go for their jog, they know that that's what holds them together. Yeah. But they don't have time to be on the college team because they're not a scholarship athlete.
Yes.
So it's an interesting dynamic. But here in New Zealand, we're starting to see the colleges, and I've been dealing with them this trip more though, because I can get funding for a lot of these schools if the high school and college will take on a high school mentor leadership program where they go down to the elementary schools and take the kids for PE.
Oh.
And so that's my move, rather than trying to get the elementary school, go more to the high school, get the funding, and then the funding can be passed down to the elementary schools. And it's interesting, because when I talk to some of these principals and assistant principals, it's like wow, the light's on. They've got it. They figured it out.
Yeah.
It's taken a long time.
Yeah. Keep an eye on this for Australia listeners. Now, 2 more questions quickly. I won't hold you up too much, Rod. You've been very generous here. New Zealand athletics, are the very strict or almost over strict qualifying standards imposed by New Zealand athletics holding the sport back a little?
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty common answer.
Yep.
Do you have much to do with the Robertson twins? Have you mentored them in any way, or have they chatted to you?
No, just good friends, Facebook friends. In fact, I was at the Millennium Centre, and Jake turned up. I was actually with Julian Matthews, who is an Olympian from 2016 in the 1500 meters.
Yep.
I was with Julian, and then the next thing is in March, or into the track, was Jake came over, and of course we'd been good friends, communicated, and of course it was great to see him. And of course Julian said something like, well, here it is. You held the New Zealand marathon record for 30-something years, and now Jake's held it. And I said, well, because I don't recognise his time unless he does it on the New York Marathon course.
Yeah.
So Jake sort of laughed, and he said, "All right, I'll go and do it then."
Yeah.
I said, "Yes, you will." So he's a good guy. He's a good guy. He's got very determined, very focused, and that's good. And I just hope that everything is legitimate and what they're doing and where they're going and how they're training. That I wish them best of wishes, best wishes, and good luck and everything else.
Okay, yeah, good. He's been a guest on our show, Jake, already.
Right.
After Biwa.
Good boy.
Now, mustaches for distance runners, surely not practical. They're a good...
That's where I used to store all my baby food, all my bananas and rice.
I've just started one, and I think there's a lot of stuff getting caught in the mid-run.
Yeah. It was all part of that, trying to be, am I different or what it was? It was just, you can see me with my big lamb chops, and then I went to a goatee, and all part of the defining who I was.
It's our favourite era of running, the 70s and 80s, the kings of the road.
Yeah.
Okay, Rod, thank you so much for your time. This will be a very sought after episode if they're all as interested as I was in hearing about this.
Wow, we did about an hour and a half.
I know, mate. You've done so well. You're a great talker.
You can't shut me out. You see, that's the problem.
Oh no, I love it. It's fantastic. It's like the books coming alive. The books that I read.
Yeah. We certainly, and that. We lost Quaxie last year, and that was a huge chunk of my life. And of course, John with his Parkinson's is not the same boy that we were. But love these guys. They're huge influences, and as were the girls. Lorraine Muller and Alison Rowe and Anne O'Dane. And of course, before them, the Millie Sampsons and the girls who were pioneers for women's running. It's just been an amazing journey, and the friendships have just been incredible. And through social media, of course, we stay in touch. I'm in touch with guys that I haven't talked to for 20, 30 years, and we connect, and it's just fabulous. And it just joins this great human circle with love and just incredible. I love it.
Yeah, and it's great to see you putting back as well.
I love it. Yep. Well, I'm still. I know Ed Hillary's looking down, and he thinks it's pretty cool too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, thank you, Rod.
Right, Jim. See you, mate.
Bye.